Joining me now, a former colleague of Steve Bannon, Kurt Bardella, of Breitbart spokesman, and back with me, Joyce Vance. Kurt, Steve Bannon, he gives a good story.
He sure does.
Sometimes it's not true.
Well,
and sometimes he takes it back, but he does give good story. What story do you expect him to tell tomorrow, given that you know him?
I think that he'll recollect a lot of what he said in Fire and Fury, which is the scene in which Donald Trump on Air Force One is writing this statement that was initially put out on behalf of Donald Trump Jr. about the Russia meeting really being about adoption policy. Bannon was in a place to have conversations with people knowing who was in the room. What were people saying? There was a conversation he reportedly had with Hope Hicks right after that meeting with President Trump where he reams her out and says, you're going to have to lawyer up. You know how much trouble you're in for being in that room? These are all anecdotes that investigators can use to piece together who knew what when, and when they bring these people back and ask them, Hope Hicks is reportedly testifying on Friday in front of the Intelligence Committee. Believe me, they're going to use the Bannon meeting tomorrow to ask Hope a lot of questions.
Joyce, at the risk of oversimplifying, you can think of witnesses like you think of the newspaper, and you have the facts in the front and the opinions in the back. And Steve Bannon is way more interesting for the facts he knows as an observer and a fact witness than his opinions. When he claimed treasonous, it was basically, that's a legal conclusion, and he was wrong about that. It's not technically treason, even if there was a crime there. Talk to us about how the investigators, particularly if he ever jumps from the House to the Mueller probe, are going to focus on his role as a fact witness.
That's the really important distinction here, because in his testimony on the Hill, Bannon can have a little bit more of a foray into opinion. We don't really know why they've decided to call him, but they may want to know a little bit more of his story. When it comes to testifying for Mueller, though, they will be focused on whether or not Bannon has personal knowledge of facts. So not enough for him to draw conclusions, but they'll want to know, were you in the room? What did people say? How did people respond? And those are very different inquiries. But Ari, I think it's important for us to note that just because we don't have any public confirmation that Bannon has spoken with someone on Mueller's team, that doesn't mean he has not spoken with Mueller, hasn't been interviewed, hasn't been in the grand jury. We know it's illegal for federal prosecutors or members of the grand jury to disclose those kind of appearances before the grand jury, and it's only the witness, him or herself, who would be at liberty to discuss it.
Right. And Kurt, if you read Fire and Fury, have you finished it?
I have.
I read it in part over a burger, which felt right.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of red meat there.
A lot of red meat. I didn't read it in bed.
Not really the appropriate venue for that.
Well, the president eats his burgers in bed. I don't know if you read that part.
I was going to say, he goes up at 5:30. If he's not having dinner with someone, he's in PJs with his bed, watching TV.
Right. And that might be a good way to chill. You know, you need to do self-care if you have a big job like the presidency.
Well, he clearly has the mental fitness to be able to assess himself and evaluate himself and then tell other medical professionals what they should say.
Right. Well, look, enough of whatever this, what do you call what we were just doing?
Banter?
I think you do call it Bannon. It's just right in the middle of the interview, very random. This is what I want to ask you. When you read Fire and Fury, you get this voice in the background, and it sounds a lot like Steve Bannon, because here, let me read to you. It's got a lot of things of Steve Bannon being really smart and ahead of the curve, like him telling his colleagues in the White House, this Russia story is a third-tier story, but you fire Comey, it'll be the biggest story in the world. Now, I believe that Steve Bannon told the author that he said that. I just don't know, if we're being fair-minded, that everyone in the White House is going to agree that Steve Bannon's account of how great he was and was right about predicting everything is actually true. How do you handicap that, given your knowledge of him?
You know, it's interesting. I read that book, and remember, I talked to this guy every day for the better part of 2 years, and I came away reading this book going, yep, that sounds just like Steve Bannon. There's
you think he called it? Do you think he was the one who knew that Comey was a bad idea?
Yeah. I mean, the way that it's described, and just the vocabulary and the language and the bombastic nature of how Steve talks, that was captured very astutely by Mike Wolff. There's no doubt that Bannon was giving him a verbatim play-by-play every day.
All right, I got another question for you while we're at it. This is just about the book. There's a part in the book where they talk about the travel ban, by any account, was going poorly. In other words, even if you are a conservative who wants that kind of policy, it was rolled out so poorly that it was blocked in the courts immediately, that it embarrassed the president, etc. There's a quote in there where Bannon says, this is how it should go, because we want to drive liberal snowflakes to the airport and have a freak out. Does that sound like him to you? Is that a real quote?
That is identical to what he would say. Particularly, he loves using the word snowflakes. He loves the idea of liberals weak and crying and emotionally distraught and not knowing what to do with themselves. That was vintage Steve Bannon. And I have no doubt, actually, that Wolf got this access from Bannon by playing to his ego, by saying, hey, you do this with me, and I'll make you sound great. I'll make you look smart. And he fell for it.
Well, he loves talking about snowflakes, but his decision to talk in that book is what put him on ice.
Oh, the funniest part is there's a passage where he says, I won't be testifying. I don't know anything.
Yeah, right. All right, Kurt Bardella, thanks for your expertise. Joyce Vance joining us in multiple segments. We appreciate it. After the break, I have a breakdown on the social conservatives supporting Trump despite his language